This is the Grappling Right Show, episode 37, Robert Drysdale, The Return. Welcome to the Grappling Right Show. My guest today, returning to the show, is Robert Drysdale. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
And Mr. Drysdale is here as he has two new books that are out and ready for your consumption. You have the Triumph of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 50 Years of a Martial Arts Revolution. And as if he wasn't busy enough, he also wrote, What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Today? Both are available at zenithjujitsushop.com and on Amazon and other booksellers. I'll put some links in the show notes. So, first of all, then, uh, Robert, why the Triumph of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 50 Years of a Martial Arts Revolution? What brought you to writing that book?
Well, it's interesting is I had the more or less those ideas and a few things, triggered that book. One was I was finishing the process of finishing What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Today when I was revisiting some old documents. And I was going through the 1975 manual of the Jiu-Jitsu Federation in Rio, right?
Mhm.
And that was the manual that pretty much solidified what we now call Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because it is the rule set that emphasized the ground, right? So the ground orientation for which Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is known it did not exist prior to 1975. It is a byproduct of the 1975 rule set that awarded 4 points for mount, 4 points for the back, as opposed to 1 point for mount, 1 point for takedown, where there was a 50-50 equivalence between ground and stand-up, which is pretty much what we call pre-war judo. And I noticed that the 1975 rule set was made official on August 2nd, 1975. So it was exactly 50 years ago, and I was about 90% done with What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Today, and this is around March. So I'm going, oh man, if I rush, maybe I can do a little short book and talk about this rule set because this is significant. Because there's a lot it was implicit in chapter 8 of the Rise and Evolution of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I didn't quite get all those points across because I think that the rule set is very important. I think it says a lot more than people realize because it is, I mean, ultimately, it is the rule set that will frame the technical practice, right? So when you change the rule set, you change the technical practice, and that is the most distinguishing. It's not the only characteristic of a martial art, but it is the most distinguishing one. So I went back and I said, okay, I'm going to write something. And then I had all these pictures, and I had been thinking in my mind, like, I have like thousands of pictures here I've collected over the years. So why not put out like a coffee table book with all these pictures? And I thought maybe I can do the Triumph of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 50 Years of a Martial Arts Revolution, as a coffee table style book because the text itself is quite short. It's like 40,000 words long. There's not that much text in the book. And it was just not enough to make a book out of it. But if I added the pictures and I can have a visual and people can visually see the evolution of Jiu-Jitsu over the years through pictures, I think I can achieve both things. And it went really well. It kind of all worked out because the central thesis of the book is that jiu-jitsu prior to 1975 was something very different from what it is today. Now, people think, oh, it's always been that way because Maeda taught, Niwaza to Carlos Gracie and so on. That's the standard story. And well, it's not true because we know that Maeda was not a ground expert. They were still training judos, the process of separation from judo on political terms and technical, I'd say, begins in the 1930s. No one can dispute that. But it was a very slow process. And between 1930 and 1975, what is being practiced in Brazil is essentially what they call jiu-jitsu, what the world knew as jiu-jitsu in some places, and is what we know to be more specifically referred to as pre-war judo. Now, why is that important? Well, judo also suffered many modifications over the years. It's not the same thing it is today as it was 100 years ago. It's been changing as well. And there's a moment there where the Brazilian interpretation of jiu-jitsu in the 1930s, 40s was not different from what the rest of the world was calling jiu-jitsu. It was self-defense with a more or less 50% interpretation of grappling with takedowns and 50% on the ground. It was what we call Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. When many other schools had a similar style. This is actually even acknowledged by Rorion Gracie, who said in an interview that it was basically the same thing. Now, to be fair, many of these conclusions are not mine. They're from Roberto Pedreira, and he's got three new books out. The Evolution of Modern Jiu-Jitsu, Volume 1 and 2, and the Heroic Age of Jiu-Jitsu, no, Heroic Age of Pre-War Jiu-Jitsu, I believe is the title of the book. And many of these conclusions are, look, there are other styles that were already doing pretty much the same things. The ground orientation was the big change, right? So prior to that, self-defense with a little bit of ground, a little bit of stand-up, it wasn't what we now refer to as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What we refer to as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was really born, I don't want to say, let me rephrase that. I don't want to say born. It developed its characteristics in the 1970s through the 1975 rule set, which is very ground oriented, and through Carlson Gracie and his rivalry with his younger brother Hollis, or Rolls in English, I should say. But their rivalry, they gave birth to a whole new, again, I use the word birth, but perhaps the word birth is not the best way to describe, but it was a modification, it was a significant modification, and to essentially what we train today. The way to explain this to people is it's difficult because these words carry so much power with them. You say judo and you think it's this one fixed thing in time that doesn't change. And the question that follows is judo win or jiu-jitsu win in the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s because it's changing all the time. So you can't compare different things. And it will be like you have to understand these things not in terms of like a big abrupt change, but rather in terms of evolution. So, for example, we know that dogs were artificially bred from wolves. We know that, right? So the question is, are dogs wolves? Well, some people would say, yeah, all dogs are wolves. Some people would say, no, they're not wolves. They're different from wolves, which they are, but they descend from wolves. So is a Chihuahua a wolf? It comes down to this definition where the words don't do justice to the discussion because the discussion is more complex and evolution has that characteristic to it. When does a Homo erectus cease from being a Homo erectus and becomes a Homo sapiens? There's no date or event. It is a process. It took millions of years. It's not something that happens overnight. And that's something that people have a hard time understanding because it's just easier to conceptualize judo versus jiu-jitsu in terms of these monoblocks of unchanging arts, which is not the case. Okay. So that's the triumph of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It consists of a lot of pictures where I separate Jiu-Jitsu prior to 1975, and I try to explain what it was, not only in Brazil, but around the world. What did Jiu-Jitsu mean prior to 1975 and what it meant after 1975? And they're very different things. And I think the evidence itself I believe, makes that crystal clear.
Were there any specific rule? Well, obviously there were specific rules that you feel were like the direct moments where the shift towards the ground fighting began.
It was, well, there was probably some cultural factors. One of them I speculate is Brazilian infrastructure. Brazil has very tight buildings. Jiu-Jitsu under the Gracie family never had government funding. That is a huge advantage judo has always had over jiu-jitsu in Brazil is that there's government funding. So you're going to end up it's a commercial practice, meaning you're dependent on your own legs to lift the business up. You don't have millions of dollars coming your way because you happen to be an Olympic sport. So they were practicing in tight spaces as a result, which makes the art more ground oriented, just by sheer fact that when you're standing up, takes more room. Standing up takes double the room that's grappling on the ground. You can fit in the double amount of people on the mats if you're on their knees. So there's one. The other one was the influence of Vale Tudo, which is the original name for MMA. A lot of younger fans don't know this, but Vale Tudo is just MMA with no gloves, and they had different rounds too. You got to understand they didn't have a commission in the 1950s and 60s. When these ideas are taking shape, there was no commission. The rounds were longer. There were no gloves. They didn't stop a fight because it got boring. It was different. In other words, so if a round goes on for 30 minutes, and some of these fights had rounds that went on for 30 minutes, that's how long these fights were. When the fight hit the ground, it stayed on the ground because no one was going to stand you back up. And if you don't have gloves on, it's much more of a grappling match. Okay, see, the gloves are about protecting your hands, not really anyone's face, and they make it much harder to finish. So with no gloves on, the fight becomes a more grappling-oriented kind of business. And the fact that the fights are long, they continue, the referee doesn't stop, them made MMA a more ground-oriented kind of business. Keeping in mind that most people they were fighting were not skilled on the ground. If you're fighting a capoeira, once a fight hits the ground, it's over. That's how you finish a fight. You take them down, you finish them. So their interpretation of jiu-jitsu was, or of MMA, or of the reality of combat, as I say it, was a very ground-oriented kind of business. So I think because the first wave of practitioners, right, the first Vale Tudo MMA fighters in Brazil, the first jiu-jitsu practitioners in Brazil, they had that ground orientation in their mind. They saw the ground as this is where you finish the fight. You don't finish the fight
Mm.
standing, you finish it on the ground. Because again, without gloves, it's harder to knock someone out. Knocking someone out with gloves is very different than knocking someone out without gloves. So it was a more ground-oriented sort of fight, which is why, I mean, if MMA were to be fair to grapplers, we would have no gloves on. I'd much prefer that. It'd be much better for grapplers, right? Big difference. Helio himself said you couldn't win a fight on your feet. You have to win a fight on the ground. In other words, it was part of their belief system that a fight ought to be won on the ground. So when they created the 1975 rule set, this is all in their minds. I mean, their experience had come from Vale Tudo, not from competition, not from judo, right? They had trained pre-war judo, but they didn't have competition experience in judo. So they had come mostly, what had framed their interpretation of combat had been Vale Tudo. So these guys make a rule set that is heavily inspired by Vale Tudo. In fact, till this day, if you look at the IBJJF rule set, it follows the progression of a fight. I take you down, I pass your guard, I put a knee on belly, I mount you. These are striking positions. You understand? According to their interpretation. Now, you
Yeah.
can find flaws in their rationale, certainly. I mean, I find them, I talk about them in the book. There's some glitches there, but you can't say that they were not concerned with the reality of combat. So, two different statements. They might have gotten a few things wrong about the reality of combat, but no one can take away from them that they were deeply concerned with it. So that's the 1975 rule set for you. It gave shape to jiu-jitsu, the closest thing to a definition that jiu-jitsu has ever had. It has many byproducts. It is another reason, just to wrap up the tight infrastructure space
Yeah.
and the influence from Vale Tudo. They also didn't want to be judo, so they wanted to be different from judo. So there was that. So as judo became more stand-up oriented, they go in the opposite direction. It's intentional. They don't want anything to do with judo. They want to be different. And and they had a more reality based approach to combat. But another reason is, and I speculate this, and I give my reasons in the book. Helio, it's what I call a misunderstanding of combat by Helio, and I don't mean this disrespectfully. So everyone's heard a claim that, or Helio claimed that he invented the guard, or his supporters saying that he invented the guard. Everyone's like, it's impossible, it's impossible. And someone will pull up a video of Kosen judo practitioners playing guard in the 1930s, 40s, whatever, which is all true, right? So no, Helio did not invent the guard. But there's a very thin backbone to his argument here, and I argue for this in the book. It's essentially a misunderstanding of combat, but that opened many creative doors. So what was the misunderstanding? Throughout his life, Helio was, first of all, he was the main political force in jiu-jitsu for most of his history in Brazil. He was the main political figure. So what he said carried a lot of weight. And he said repeatedly throughout his life that he never entered a fight trying to win. He entered a fight trying not to lose. Now, that seems like a strange statement. If you said that to a boxer or a wrestler, he'd be very confused. Only in jiu-jitsu circles, that doesn't sound confusing because we know what Helio means because he's been saying it his whole life. So I don't enter a fight trying to win. I enter a fight trying not to lose. Now, what to translate that? What does that mean? I'm trying to draw. Because if you're not trying to win, but also don't want to lose, what are you doing? You're looking for a draw.
Sure.
Okay. If you look at Helio's record, I believe that out of his most of his fights were a draw. I can't remember. I think out from memory now, he won two and he lost two and drew seven or something like that. I can't from memory. Now, I don't want to trust my memory, but the majority of his fights were draws. And he fought for a draw and he considered a draw a win. Why? Because I'm weak. So he framed himself as a weak person. It's not true. He was an elite swimmer and rower in Brazil prior to knowing jiu-jitsu. But he framed himself as the weak person. So if I draw with someone who he considered to be heavier and stronger, now how do you measure someone being stronger? I don't know how you do that. That wasn't done. That was just what he said.
Yeah.
Though for I won because I am the lighter person, right? And that mentality is very ingrained. So if I end up in guard and I am there for 30 minutes or 3 hours for that matter, and the guy can't put me away, then I really won the fight because I'm the lighter guy. And that became their motto. That became like a way of thinking. It's very ingrained in the culture. So they began to look at the guard as a neutral position because that was where they were going to draw. The guard was a place for drawing. We're going to draw here, and if we don't lose, we really won. You understand? So the guard is interpreted, by that generation as a neutral position in a fight. Now, anyone who watches MMA knows that that's not true. Now, again, we can be unfair to them and apply 2025 standards to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. It's not the same. But there's something to be said about a misunderstanding of the guard being a neutral position. This because in the fight, top normally holds the high ground, literally has better striking advantages, right? Again, their interpretation is influenced by MMA. When they craft a rule set, that mentality that the guard is a neutral position makes its way into the rule set. So for you to reverse me in jiu-jitsu, you have to put my foot in half guard. So if you reverse me from side control or mount, it's nothing. But if my ankle is in your half guard, it's 2 points. In other words, you have to achieve neutrality before you can attack. Now try to explain that to a wrestler. I mean, you cannot explain that if I bridge you over from side control, I don't get anything. But if the ankle's in half guard, I get two. It's very difficult for them to conceptualize because it makes no sense. And from a fighting perspective, they're not wrong. It makes absolutely no sense. It only makes sense if you take the misunderstanding into consideration. And the misunderstanding is the guard is a neutral position. For you to make defense into offense, you have to go to neutral first. Because again, we're talking about a linear progression in a fight. From neutral to offense, from neutral to defense. You understand? Neutral is what you have to achieve before you turn the fight into offense. That's why everything is centered around the guard. In fact, if you look at most instructionals today, the vast majority of them are what? Guard passing and guard playing. Guard passing, guard playing. Meaning it has become no man's land. The guard is no man's land. And if the guard is no man's land, it's a very, very important aspect of the game. That's where you put your best machine guns in no man's land. It's trench number 1. You don't put your best soldiers and equipment on trench number 9. You put your best weapons where? Trench number 1. That's where the real fight takes place. Okay, that's exactly what we do, isn't it? Now, this is all a consequence. We didn't see this, but it is the natural consequence of making the guard a neutral position. And this belief is deeply embedded in the psyche of these guys, of the first wave of jiu-jitsu practitioners, thanks to Helio Grace's misunderstanding. I hope I made sense.
Yeah, that's just unclouded it a little bit more in my mind actually, and how I understand it. So no, thank you for that. When this rule set came in though, was there like much resistance in the martial arts community, with the rule set? Were there people opposed to this sort of evolution? So now it needs to stay the same because we kind of hear it comes in, it gets passed, and everyone gets on with it. But were there people against it? Was there opposition?
We don't know the politics of it. What we do know is that Helio approved and had to approve everything. Helio was the political force, not the
Yeah.
technical force, but he was the political force. And he approved of the rules that the second August 2nd date, 1975, like his name is underneath the signature is right. It's all there. He signed off on it, so he agreed to it, but it's ironic, and this is something I don't quite understand because we don't have the sources. He is a critic of the rule set his whole life, yet he signed off on it. So my take on it is that he signed off on it under pressure. He didn't like the idea, but he was compelled to do it by others who thought it was a good idea. And at some point, he was like, "This is a terrible idea. We should go back." And because he's a critic of the rule set, but he signed off on it. So to me, this sounds very contradictory. Um, it's difficult to say exactly what was going through his head, but what we do know is that he was critic of stalling and people not going for the submission and strong guys winning competition. But that's just a natural effect of competition. Like the more athletic guys typically going to win. Like there's no surprises there. But he was a critic of it. But it's hard to say. They went back and forth. A lot of things, like some minor things, changed about the rules. Structurally, it remained the same from 1975 all the way to today, including ADCC rule set, which is essentially also a byproduct of the 1975 rule set. It's remained the same. There's some marginal things that have changed over the years, but not many.
So do you think then it was the 1975 rule set that set the ball rolling for the global prominence of BJJ? Like so from this it rolls through builds up, because then you get the Gracie challenge, the Gracie in action, then through to the UFC, through to the boom. Now, is this the push of the ball that starts rolling down the hill? Do you think?
It's part of the reason. I think that there's Roberto Pedreira calls judo left a vault unattended. That's how he calls Newaza. It's like it's a treasure. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack there. And I'm like, yes, I agree. I think everyone agrees. There's a lot to unpack on the ground. Judo left it unattended. It didn't see the importance of it. Well, someone else did. Some other people did. And they saw it and they went right, ran with it. And I think we're reaping the fruit of you know, of things that were seeds that were planted, 50 years ago because they saw something. There's a lot of potential on the ground. And we're still exploring it. We're still not done exploring it. Every week, someone shows me something new that I've never seen before. So there's definitely a lot there, and I think we finally caught the world's attention. It's been a minute. It took a while. 50 years later, only 50 years, but the world came to appreciate and acknowledge what it is that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has to offer. And it doesn't mean it doesn't have problems or contradictions or things or weaknesses. It's like any other building, it has its imperfections, but it's fair to say it's the fastest growing martial art in the world. I don't think anyone can dispute that.
No, no, definitely. So with your BJJ today, but now what are you hoping to achieve with this?
So, with this book, um, it was a suggestion by Roberto Pereira, who, by the way, was a huge influence on me and all my books. I'm always quick to give him credit because I couldn't have done it without his assistance and suggestions and private correspondence. But
Hmm.
he suggested, why don't you write a taidan? A taidan is an exchange between two experts. It's like a back and forth chat between two experts, between you and a good friend of yours or former opponent of yours, right? And as an example, there's a taidan in one of his books between Yamashita and Kimura. It's very interesting. They're talking about life, training, mindset, right? All over the place. It's like a back and forth between two fighters, right? A very informal chat. And I go, oh, that would be interesting. So I wrote an article with a former rival of mine. He happens to be staying in my house right now. He's in the room next door. His name is Fernando Soluço. So I wrote a tie down with him. I'm like, oh, let's do this, man. We did it in person. He was here for Masters Worlds, I think last year or the year before. And Sulu, chega aí, cara. I'm gonna show him. This is him. Chega aí, fala oi aqui. That's him.
That's weird.
And then, so I was like, hey, so let's sit down and do this. So we do like a 1 hour, whatever, back and forth talking about jiu-jitsu. He's, pioneer of jiu-jitsu in Ecuador. And I'm like, I wanted to chat with him. And it came out really good. I'm like, oh man, this is really fun. I liked what we did here. And then Pedro suggested, why don't you should do more and maybe, put a book together. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that. So I started interviewing people that I wanted various backgrounds. I didn't want people all competitors. So everyone's, oh, give me a famous competitor. And that's not what I was aiming for. I was aiming for people that had a different perspective on jiu-jitsu, not just I know how to win tournaments. I wanted, people. I interviewed the IBJJF CEO, Marcelo Siriema, some coaches. My mind was drifting towards coaching methodology at the time I was writing this, so I ended up interviewing like 5 high-level coaches. Seth Daniels from Fight to Win, Terere, who's an icon of the sport, Julius Caesar, the founder of GF Team, Draculino from Gracie Barra, Paulo Rezende, Ryan Hall. I wanted a jiu-jitsu representative from MMA, MMA representative in the jiu-jitsu book or whatever.
Yeah.
Ryan Hall was a perfect fit. It was going to be Frank Mir originally. I just couldn't schedule with Frank. Then I was like, I liked the idea of Ryan Hall so much. I was going to add Frank Mir to it, but just never happened. Me and Frank, we can never sit down. We live in the same city, but we can never actually sit down. It just never works. And who else? And some other Adam Virginski, who's the first Europe. He's the only like active competitor that I interviewed because he was the first European to win a world title. And I've known him since he was a white belt. So his Taidan turned out to be one of the best ones. And then I wanted a perspective from people from sister arts, wrestling and judo. So for judo, I interviewed Satoshi Ishii, the Olympian. And in wrestling, we had a chat with Ben Askren. And it was they were both very productive. And I wanted to talk, what is it that judo has that BJJ doesn't have? And what is it that wrestling has that BJJ doesn't have? because I was like, why can't we learn from them? What is it that they have that they're great at that we can incorporate, right? And learn something from. So they're there as well, even though it seems a little strange that you have a judoka and a wrestler in a book titled "What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Today?" And but I think it fit well. And then I have my own conclusions there. I have a chapter on AI and how it's impacting jiu-jitsu and social media and how it's become the dominant force. And there's something to be worried about because it is not always a rational um, shaping force. It is very irrational, and we just go along with it because everyone, oh, this is where the future is going. It's almost like we are members of a technology church, and it says, well, that's what God said, So we got to go where the technology is going. We just follow technology blindly. I think this is very odd. I think you should challenge these things just because not some of the technology is good. I'm not challenging the whole, but the idea that technology should lead human progress, evolution, prosperity in every way without being challenged. I think this is a very strange notion to me. Like that you just put your life in the hands of ChatGPT and go, oh, we're good. I don't have to think anymore. I am no longer human. I am a citizen of the Matrix now, you know. And it's
Cinema
where
has
we're
warned
headed.
us enough about this for a long time.
And it's terrifying. No one seems to see it. My students think I'm crazy for reading. They go, Rob, you have ChatGPT. Why would you read? And I'm just looking at them. You can't be serious. No, this is worse than saying I don't need to train jiu-jitsu. I have YouTube. To me, that sounds less ignorant than someone saying I don't need to read. I have ChatGPT. And it's terrifying that people actually believe these things. They're essentially handing over their cognitive capacity, what makes them human, what is distinguishingly human about them. They're handing it over and saying, like, I don't want to think, it's too hard. I just want to indulge in pleasure and I just want to feel good all the time. So you're basically in the Matrix. The Matrix became a documentary, and Nietzsche's Last Man has become a very disappointing, reality. Like it's become a goal is to be is to be this unthinking, untried and comfortable little thing that just gets everything he wants without, having to work hard for it. And it's kind of where we're headed. So I make a case, I believe, I hope I did, that jujitsu is a potential solution to this because it's the opposite of all that. If you adhere to the lessons on the mats, it is the opposite of all that. Everything is hard, everything is earned, everything is difficult, but there's a greater value to that AI cannot match. It can give your life meaning. AI can't do that. That's something AI can't do. And we're more deficient of meaning in this world than we are of material possessions. We're more deficient of meaning than we are of comfort, right? Than we are of information. I think it's a bigger problem of entertainment. These are the things we're obsessed over. But I don't think we're deficient in entertainment, comfort, and pleasure and things to do and information. We have too much of it. What we're deficient is things to fight for. But see, things to fight for are necessarily difficult. They're the opposite of what you're chasing. So in some ways, where it's like we're moving in the opposite direction where we should be moving. And I think jujitsu comes in as a solution to a lot of this. And I strongly believe that. And that's why I think this is why we need jujitsu. It's not because we need an activity at the end of the day or just because we're lonely. This is a meaning creating force. And not the only one. I'm saying only jujitsu has that potential. But I have a hard time thinking of something that is, more primal than combat. And I think that there's a little, especially for men. I can't speak for women so much, but I think we're missing a little bit in a world where you don't have to hunt anymore. You don't have to climb. You don't have to swim and fish. You can just press a
It's
button
the
and Amazon,
losing of skills, isn't it? It's the
like Amazon delivers everything to your front door except women. And for that, other websites exist. Okay. There's nothing else you
yeah.
have to fight for. Okay. We need to fight. We're men. We're meant to be fighting. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very positive, constructive, beautiful thing. Like fighting and the ability to fight and achieve and conquer that's what makes us human. That's what
So
distinguishes us from the animal kingdom. Yeah.
did you find in your research, with the question, what is BJJ today? Did you find that maybe the answer was different depending on maybe culture and geography, or maybe a certain techniques, or was it? Did you find a similar pattern around from your research?
There's the culture is changing rapidly. It's not, there's a difference between a culture and a philosophy, as I use these two terms. Like judo has a philosophy, which in some regards is questionable. Some regards, in my opinion, not don't even merit the term, of being called a philosophy, or they're even contradictory in some regards. But there is a philosophy there, and you can dispute that. And it's been remarkably or pretty much the same. Right? Let's say the Seiryoku Zenyo and Jita Kyoe are like two of the columns of judo's philosophy, right? Like maximum efficiency of your energy and mutual benefit. Okay. But at least it's written down. Right? When it comes to BJJ, we don't have a philosophy because it's not written down, it's not articulated. We have a culture. It was a militaristic culture aimed at private lessons and self-defense prior to 1975. After 1975, it has this Spartan ethos of meritocracy, and you got to work hard, you got to earn your keep, and you're only welcome to the club if you're willing to put up a fight and meet the standard. No one's going to lower the standard for you. This is not a business. This is the warrior cult. That's what it was. It was essentially a warrior cult. And now it was that until 1993, where it peaked, in my opinion. That's when it peaked in cultural terms. But it's not written down. It's not coded. So what do? It descends into a commercial practice. So we become what we used to criticize. So now we become Taekwondo. We used to criticize Taekwondo and karate. Yeah, here we are. We're no different. Unfortunately, in some regards, not in every regards, but we lost out of the things. But there's a positive side of that. Everyone's rich. It's like, oh, everyone's rich. Everyone's rich. Okay, everyone's rich. But we lost what it was that brought us into prominence in the first place.
Mhm.
Now we're entering an even worse. The next phase after that is the circus, which is where we're going back to. We started from the circus, we're back to the circus. These things are cyclical, right? Catch wrestling went through a similar motion. We're back into circus because once you make entertainment as the measurement of success, you can entertain less. You can only entertain more. You can't give someone a dose of a drug and the next time give them less. No, no, no. I want the same and greater. And that's how entertainment works. You can't, if Craig Jones gives you him versus Gabby Garcia with Speedos and alcohol, the next one's got to be a bigger bang. You can't go back. You understand? And once, and the UFC VJ is not going to be any different. Like professional organizations, that's what they do. They are aimed at giving the public more. But at some point, if you keep going that route, it starts to lose credibility because it's just a matter of time before someone figures out that girls grappling in bikinis in the mud is the ultimate. And once people realize that that's the ultimate form of entertainment, okay, that's what it's there's I mean, I'm not saying that per se as an example, but the deterioration of from the warrior code, right, which actually brought jiu-jitsu. And the reason why Joe Rogan talks about BJJ nonstop is because he's still talking about that warrior code that he saw. It's not clear to me how much Joe Rogan has seen the loss of that in detriment of something else. Well, we're watching that happen. And I don't. What happens next is the loss of. If the cycle is to continue, is the loss of credibility, not necessarily of popularity, but of credibility first, and then maybe popularity second. I hope not. One of the reasons why I write these books is to make people aware of these problems so it doesn't happen. But to me, and again, I'm not, the most versed person in history, but I know something about it. And if there's anything I learned from Roberto Pedrero's books is these things are very cyclical. And it's happened before, it will happen again. And so far the prophecy has proven to be true because it seems to be going in that direction.
Do you think has it strayed from its path further than some other martial arts, or do you think it's just across the board from what they were originally to what they are now? Like obviously, like we said, the commercial thing we talked about before is come into it, and
I
and that balance of there's a you need to run a business, but at the same time, you
It's a
know,
pull. It's a push pull. For
what are
example,
you sacrificing to do that? Yeah.
arts like wrestling, boxing, and judo, they can stay true to some principles because they're not dependent on customers to pay their bills. They're Olympic sports. So the coach is paid by the state. So they have that advantage. We grew on the strength of our own legs. How can we stop the commercial force from shaping our culture? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I know they're contradictory. And I see this in jiu-jitsu's leadership. They go, they go, there's no contradiction between, jujitsu being a life-changing force and commerce. I'm like, yeah, there's a push and pull there because commerce has a tendency of delivering, giving more in exchange for less, right? That's what a business does. You don't go to the grocery store that charges more for food. You go to the grocery store that charges less. Everything else being equal, you buy the cheaper car, the cheaper phone, right? That's commerce for you. Like whoever, that's capitalism. Um, with that being said, if you keep lowering the cost of something because you want to reach big numbers and you want more people walking through the door, at some point there's a loss of value. There's an opposite effect of that. There's a reason why women like Louis Vuitton handbags, and it's not because they're better quality. That's what they say. It's like no one really believes that. You don't really believe that. You want to flex your power. You want to flex something special that has meaning to you precisely because it's expensive or difficult, right? I'm not. I'm not praising handbags for the record, okay? But it says something about value. And when something becomes too cheap and common, and everyone is a black belt, well, what's the value of a black belt if everyone's a black belt? We presume that a black belt is valuable if it's rare, if it's difficult, and it's like being a Navy SEALs versus being a Boy Scout. Anyone can be a Boy Scout. Not everyone's fit to be a Navy SEAL. All right, which one is more respected? Which one holds value as far as your own being goes, right? And I think jiu-jitsu is undergoing all these things right now, and it's a lot of it is still up in the air. But I do my best to register. I I hope that future historians can read my books and go, okay, this is what was happening. So there's less wondering about how BJJ evolved and what happened to it about than it is about what did actually happen. And I think there's enough information out there to at least understand where it is that we are and where it is that we are headed.
With the sort of the new school jiu-jitsu or whatever you want to call it nowadays, that is growing now, and we're getting all these tournaments. You said about like Craig James, all his stuff. We've just got now. We're in. I think the third show's coming out of the UFC BJJ thing now,
Yeah.
and and I imagine there's going to be starting things. I mean, there's also that real American freestyle wrestling coming out now, where people seem to be suddenly putting money into these arts, and they're trying to keep them the same or promote them as such. But again, are there aspects of that you think are good, or do you think there are aspects now that are not going to stand the test of time?
I I it's hard to say. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. The word jiu-jitsu has been around for too long for it to disappear now. It's changing. It's going to keep changing. We evolved next to the internet, which means we evolved next to a generation of people that are addicted to information. So the variety of techniques in jiu-jitsu and newaza actually go hand in glove with the generation's appetite for more information and variety. It kind of goes hand in hand more and more. Every 5 seconds, give me something new. It's part of it's part of the appeal, like that we evolved during the democratic age. There's no more hierarchy. Everyone's equal. There's no hierarchy. The white belt knows as much. I had a white belt disagree with me the other day. He said, "Oh, I like that position where you did it, but I prefer to do it this way." And I'm like, I'm not offended, because I'm not insecure, but it's like, wow, this is unthinkable, right? So we evolved in an era where like everyone's an expert. I got access to the internet. That makes me I have free speech and I have access to information. Therefore, I am an authority. Like they draw this conclusion, right? This is why you get, white belts arguing with online with people that are red belts. So they'll argue. They think they're right. Yeah. There's these tendencies are all there. It's hard to say, man, what's going to happen next, but there seems to be some common denominators, and um, yeah, I love jujitsu. There's some things that I really reminisce. There's some things I appreciate. I try to cultivate. I live this because I'm a walking contradiction. Because I I preach all this, I talk about it, and I write about it. Yet I am running a business. And yet I have to concede every day, and it kills me inside that I have to concede to this BS. I have to apologize to parents when their kids lose matches, like it's my fault. Like it's just these things, and I didn't like. I like jujitsu for the opposite reasons. And here I am, like I'm talking about it, I'm preaching it, but in practice, I'll go out of business if I actually uphold what it is that I am writing about. I'll go out of business. So I envy wrestling because they get a paycheck from the government. Like, oh, they make less. I don't know. I think that'd be better. I think I prefer that, man. I make less, but I wouldn't have the headaches. and I'd be able to run practice the way I want to. Um, it's changing. It's changed a lot, and I don't know where it's going to go. I try do my best to try to change how my students think and try to reshape, right? But again, I'm against the internet. Even though they respect me and listen to me, I'm against a force that is much greater than me. I'm against the algorithm, and the algorithm give them what they want. You see, that's what the algorithm does. It's perfectly adapted to our own narcissism. It feeds into your narcissism. You are the center of the universe, not God, not the sun, not your country. You, the individual, are the center of the universe. Here's why. And the algorithm feeds you everything you want. And then you have this worldview where no one can disagree with you, right? So when my students walk through the door, they already know what jiu-jitsu is. They don't need me. And I'm trying to convince them, like, listen, there's more to this than just what you're seeing online, but they're not going to believe you because it's 100% of what they see. So now I find myself at war with Instagram. And it's not, I give this speech every day, man, but it's like pulling teeth. I write books about it in hopes that maybe I can change people's perception. It's not easy. It's not easy, man. They listen to me. They respect me. They superficially agree, but then you watch their behavior, and it's like it's like putting chocolate and broccoli in front of a child, and you can give them a speech of how broccoli is better than chocolate or McDonald's, right, or whatever, and they go, "Yeah, we know broccoli is better. We agree." But if you put the both in front of them and no one's watching, 9 out of 10 they're going to go for the chocolate. You understand? And that's what's happening here. I can only talk about how broccoli is better for them. It doesn't taste as good, but it's superior. But when it comes down to it, there's an enormous amount of pressure for people to go in for the lesser quality item. And that's kind of where jiu-jitsu is right now.
Well, that makes it's almost explain like that is why we need jiu-jitsu today because there's fights on the mat and fights off the mat like that. Now I think that's good. What's next for you? Where are you taking this next? What's the next book?
I have a few projects. I have two unfinished ones that require a lot of editing. I'm not my heart's not there right now, so I might just push those. I have something that's more or less taken shape in my mind. It's essentially material that it was consisted of material for the first and second edition of the second edition of the first and second book, Open and Closed Guard and the Rise and Evolution. But it was too it went from like, oh, it's going to add 30 pages to it's going to add 100 pages to each, and I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to write them. And my editor Scott Burton, he's the one that gave me the idea. It's like, Rob, just write a new book. And I'm like, that's not a bad idea. And then I have these other things that I some points that I want to that I mentioned in the What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Today, but I don't think I've articulated it well enough. And why is it that I defend the meritocracy? Why is it that the meritocracy is a superior form of organization in terms of jiu-jitsu, right? Why is it that merit is everything and marketing is something to be combated? And I want to talk more about this. So the loose title for the book is Rethinking Jiu-Jitsu Towards a Meritocratic Reading of History. So I'm going to analyze a number of events in history that are highly popular, yet in my mind yield no, they're not significant. They're just popular for being popular, famous for being famous. And then I'm going to contrast them with other events that should be heralded as heroic, but no one even knows about them because they weren't marketed. It's just like you guys are letting marketing shape your thinking and your ideas of what success is. And I think that is very unhealthy because success, as I perceive it, comes with, I believe, the right sort of values. Whereas what people typically, or the internet typically perceives as success, comes with a set of bad values, normally politics and lying and sensationalism and exaggeration and all these things that aren't descriptive of the jiu-jitsu code that I believe in, even if I don't always uphold it in practice. And I want to contrast these things. So it's a book about merit and why jiu-jitsu needs to be merit oriented and not marketing oriented. It doesn't matter how many followers you have. I care about your results. It's the only thing I'm interested in. And I think this is very important. And that's where I'm at. And then I have this idea too of writing jiu-jitsu history, but in a comic book format. I want to write I'm having the problem that people don't read. People don't read. And there's a
I'm
part of
battling
me,
that every day as a school teacher.
and I'm trying to explain to listen, no, I'm a podcast kind of guy. That's what I hear all the time. And I'm like, I don't want, how do you say it without being a dick? I don't know how to do it. It's not the same. I want people to listen to this podcast, but this is to introduce you to something. This is not going to teach you anything. You can't just memorize what I said and say, I know. No, you don't. You just memorize what I said. That doesn't make you knowledgeable. I could be wrong. How do you know I'm not wrong? You shouldn't trust me.
To go
There's
and
no
do
reason
their
why.
own research, read the
There's
books,
absolutely
cases
no
like yeah.
reason. 100%. You shouldn't trust a thing I said. You should look into it. And that takes a lot of reading. You don't do that on YouTube. I'm sorry. You don't do that on social media. In fact, social media is the opposite of learning. It's negative learning. It just confuses you. You're going to have to get your hands dirty. And then that's the issue. But I thought maybe I can achieve some new readers. I can begin the conversation, right? Like that's what I'm doing with this podcast. How can I begin the conversation? So I go on podcast to begin the conversation. But I think I can do that, with a comic book. So, and I used to love comic books when I was a kid. I never thought I'd be right. I can't draw to save my life, but I draw stick figures poorly. So I have to hire an artist, but I thought about doing that. I think that'd be a fun project to tell this history in a comic book format, something that's accessible to children. And I that's maybe something for next year. I'm actually taking the rest of the year off, man. The last 6 months have been madness. And when I say off, I'm still teaching, traveling. I'm still doing the things,
Yeah.
running a business. I just mean from writing. That's like, because there was a minute there, like, because I wrote that Triumph of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I wrote that thing like 3-4 months in a rush, and it was just like, I'm not doing that again, man. That was madness. I'm not doing that again because I was trying to meet that August deadline, right?
Yeah.
And
It's
it
the
turns out the
anniversary of the, yeah, I won't be saying that, yeah. Well, no, well, that's brilliant. We look forward to whatever you bring out next then. And thank you for joining us this week. It's been a huge pleasure, as always.
Likewise, it's your pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And then I'll share the link with you later, and you can share it with your listeners.
Thank you once again to Robert Drysdale for taking time out of his busy schedule to join us this week. Again, if you want to get hold of his new books, such as What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Today and The Triumph of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 50 Years of a Martial Arts Revolution, you can get those at zenithjujitsushop.com, his website. You can also get Opening Closed Guard and The Rise and Evolution of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on there as well, his previous books. All come highly recommended. Well, that brings this week's show to an end. I have been your host, Brett Summers. Now, we'll be back next week with another guest, as always. In the meantime, you can keep up to date on everything we do at thegrappleofyoureye.com. We're also available on Instagram, Facebook. We've got a bit on TikTok, Threads, X, and most social medias. You can keep track of what we're up to. And if you would like to listen to our podcasts, they are out every Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time. You can get them on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Audible, on YouTube as well. And also, if you like to watch the video episode, it also goes up on YouTube every Thursday at the same time at 7 a.m. So thank you again for your support. Please rate and review us, like and subscribe and all that. It really does make a big difference to us and helps us out a lot, and we would be really appreciative. But as I say, our time together this week draws to a close. We'll meet again next week. Stay safe and stay on the mats.
I tend to tell people from an amateur wrestler to a professional wrestler to a cage fighter to being the alpha male of senior citizens now.
I would definitely recommend BJJ. I say quite frequently, I think it's really helped Clay. It's given him some structure, it's given him discipline, and also, but probably the most important thing, it's given him a routine. I mean, with the training, he knows where we're going to be, what day. He goes into the same gym or the same gyms now because he trains at different gyms, and it's helped him. It's built relationships with his peers. He's got great friends. He's got some great role models in the gyms that he trains at, with not only the coaches but all the adults that are there. And it's just a great environment. It took me by surprise. It wasn't what I expected when we first walked into a gym.
And it's interesting in that there are a number of tournaments that are promised and organized with the Future Federation. And in one of them, there's a clause there will be tournaments with strikes involved, but they will be held under different regulation. And I saw that, and I completely missed that the first time I read that document, right? I'm going, holy cow. I think that our forefathers, our founding fathers, they had the wisdom to see that a competition rule was going to drift away from the reality of combat, and that a rule set with strike was necessary in order to maintain that foot in reality.
When I qualified for the Olympic Games and being the first female in wrestling for New Zealand, I think that really took the cake. I think that was the best feeling ever, and I think about it often still, and it still makes me feel really good.